It demands that we tell sinners the whole truth.
We will not go quietly into the night.
Voice of truth says this is for my glory.
Christian Cornerstone Podcast.
Welcome to the Christian Cornerstone Podcast, brought to you by the Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministries, where we exist to equip the saints for the work of ministry and the building up of the body of Christ. That's our goal, that's our purpose, that's our drive, and we have another episode here that we're getting into. We're actually going to be taking a little bit of a shorter moment here. In this episode, we're going to be discussing 1 Samuel, which is supposed to be, along with our devotional reading that we're doing each week, this is supposed to be based off of memory, 1 Samuel chapter 8 through 31. So there's a lot there, and unfortunately you can't get through, 10, 15 chapters within an hour period. So we had to cut this short, focused on a couple different snippets of the section, and we actually left a little bit out because we're going to be getting into it next week. You'll find out more about that within the episode. So I'd encourage you guys, if you're listening in, you've enjoyed the show, I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast, where we can help you and to answer your questions. You can have some fun stuff listening to while you're at work. I do that too. I'll completely admit that. I listen to the show. It's pretty fun. And so without further ado, because I actually do get into some further announcements within this episode, let's go ahead and get into the show. All right, so we're back here with Mr. Michael White. Now, I got a question for you, Michael.
Yeah. We
had a little bit of a pandemic, we could call it, this week. So my question is, a little, was it like an hour or two, I think is what it was, maybe less, pandemic. Facebook was shut down, and I think you actually put a post on Facebook asking your audience that. I read, I was reading at work and was super busy, so I didn't get the chance to read it all. So I guess I'm curious, because it was really interesting. What was your response when you found out, oops, the world is coming to an end?
Yeah, so I was actually just about to jump on an interview for a new business owner, and I'm on the business mentor I'm on his email list, and so he sent a second email that I refreshed couple minutes before, and I'm like, why did he send another one? He already sent one this morning, and he spun it in this way of so did you see Meta is down, Facebook, Instagram, do you guys have a way to contact your customers? Because if not, kind of you're screwed. But then he's like, yeah, but also let me have a plug to sell you guys something while you're in this mode of building your email list. So I think I knew it was going to come back, so it was a little funny, that's smart of him to do. But also I thought of the real life, what if I was kicked off of Instagram is my main thing for my business, and even personal, and a lot of it, the personal is just photos since I was in high school, so it's just fun to see my different looks. But for the business, I was if I was kicked off, I would be so screwed, because I understand the importance of having an email list. I tried launching that. I think I've gotten 2 new people since I posted, because I did the same thing he did, because I'm kind of watching him, and I'm if he's making a big deal, then I will too, of hey, you guys, did you see there's a shutdown? Follow me, join my list so that you can stay in contact no matter what. Right. So I got 2 new people, which is, exciting for them to have them on. But yeah, it really makes you think, what do you do with your business if these free sites all of a sudden go down? Or maybe they kick you off. I feel for a lot of us, that is more likely down the line, or could be, especially let's just look at as Christians. That is something we see in other countries. They're silencing, they're persecuting much more than we would even have in America. And we're not going to get our heads chopped off or have underground churches, but I could definitely see that coming in the coming years, where you would just get kicked off if you're trying to spread the gospel. So thinking of that is oh.
Yeah, and I my first thoughts was I've been hacked, because years ago, can't really censor it too much, but when my ex was causing a fuss, she was basically getting on all my stuff and messaging people and deleting people and basically trying to hide stuff. So she got on my account one time and changed my password, and I was logged out. So I was thinking, wait a minute, and I don't even know why I would think that she would, I haven't.
She's
my
back.
Wife. Yeah, I was oh no. But then I was thinking, it's I was concerned as like it was hacked, and I think I actually texted you and asked you about that. Yeah, I asked you to check it, but
I think it was on the call, so I saw it after, and I'm like, oh yeah, it was down. It wasn't you.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah, and I was worried about like a hack because, not really that there's anything to hide, and I don't really have too much of a bank account, but you see some of these scammers and getting on profiles and just posting all sorts of stuff. I was like, I don't want that. I don't need that. And I was like, I hope that's not what's happening here. And then I had another friend actually, what I told you about, which let me know. It's like, no, it's all down. I was like, oh, thank you. Everybody's suffering. So, I thought about that too. Is like, what would happen? It's like, because that's kind of currently, I guess, society itself. I mean, the main ways they communicate with each other is Instagram, Facebook. What's the other one? WhatsApp. I think Facebook has, or Meta, I guess we could call it.
Meta bought them out too, right?
Yeah. I think they have another platform. I don't remember exactly, but it was all shut down. I've got a buddy in Germany that we talk on via Messenger, and I was like, oh no, I can't talk to him anymore. I don't have his address.
Yeah. Oh, you don't know that? Yeah.
So yeah, I was like, that really brought some insight. And we had this happen a couple years ago too. Yes, it came back, but you make a very good point. It's like, what would happen if this just shut down and, Christians themselves are, the primary suspects or primary victims, I would say, throughout this. You see this all throughout the news and the legal system. Christians in general are being attacked. We've got to conform, because for equality and, our equality, our views don't matter. What matters is the other people and so on.
And
so
within that too, I was going to say my church, as I've mentioned on the show, we've had the home fellowships.
Yeah.
And for one, they do it on the off season, so just a way to stay in the Word and get connected. But I've heard from multiple people, they're also afraid of, say the churches get shut down, because the one I go to has already been targeted. They're still in a lawsuit with the county. But if it gets taken down or something happens to the majority of churches, we will know who those around us are Christians, and we will have already kind of have a set, we meet once a week in the house, kind of like in the Bible, in Acts, I think, when they have those small gatherings. And so that was kind of their second, not motive, but kind of like backup plan. Like, we don't know what this year is having, because 2024 can go many different ways, but a lot of people I've just heard they think it's going to be terrible. So I'm like, oh, I wonder when that's going to happen. But also, I'm like, I'm going to build a business. I can't, elections. But I thought that was really interesting. I'm like, oh, that is cool, because we know those around us, and we have it at our house. So we can always, if something happens, meet here and we'll figure out how can we do it.
And those things are a real blessing. There was one pastor, which I've quoted him. I've got his study Bible, MacArthur. When the pandemic thing actually happened back in 2020, he made a comment. It was a good thing, and I was like, I agree with you, because it purges the church from the sheep and the goats, or like we shared the other last week, the wheat and the chaff. So, it's kind of a downer to lose, so many people within our fellowship prior to whatever sort of calamity happens. But at the same time, it's good because, one, you know who the true believers are, who are staying faithful and staying around. And then also it's good because you know who the false believers are, and you can go and minister to them. So, it's very, very beneficial. It's like I said, it's not one of those things we want to happen initially. You could have 300 some odd people or more, and then the next thing you're dropping down to 20. But, it's good. But, that was my, I guess, the excitement we both had. I did actually have something else. Oh, you know what? Yes, because I got a little excited with you and almost freaked you out the other day. I wanted to share this, and for the record, those of you who are listening, it is still a work in progress. Michael actually asked me if, it's like, hey, do you want me to promote it? No. Well, links. I think that's what you said. Share the links.
Member.
Right. We've decided to create a Facebook group for the audience, and not primarily for the audience, because that's the motivation there. But not limited to a Facebook group for the community to interact with us, to dialogue in we want to take, we're already taking this whole Bible study approach to this podcast, but we want to try to promote that a little bit more, because there's people out there, you might even be one of them, who doesn't have a Bible study group for whatever the particular reason is. Or your schedule might be different, so you can't go to a Bible study group. So we want to try to have this, I want to say supplement, backup plan. We'll go with backup plan. This backup plan for you. As we go through this Bible, we want to have a community in which you can follow along with us, which we have our page, of course, but you can't put your posts up there. You can't say, hey, look, I've read this verse here. I thought it was really wonderful, or what does this mean? How does this harmonize, and so on. So that's a point of us making this Facebook group. We will promote it sometime in the future. I want to hope say for a few days, because I mentioned to Michael, we need to get some bylaws set up there. So that way people who do come in know, is like, hey, this group, this is our position of the Christian faith. This is what we believe. And then also some standard bylaws of being any sort of social community, the do's and don'ts of society, so to speak. So that is on the list, and I'm hoping to get that taken care of within the next few days. Worst case scenario, next week. What worst case scenario? The last resort? Is that what I want? At the latest. There we go. That's the words I was looking for. At the latest. So, actually, you know what? Regardless if it's taken care of or not, we'll introduce it next week. So, because it'll all be, I don't expect too much fuss within a week. So, we'll share that then. And I hope you guys who are listening enjoy this. Hope you have fun with it, and we look forward to dialoguing and sharing our faith, sharing what we know, learning from you, and so on, so that we can all grow. And as Ephesians 4:12 says, to equip the body for the work of ministry. So, without further ado, which I could have actually put that in the intro thing, but it's kind of too late for that now. So we're actually we're supposed to go over 1 Samuel, or at least the reading was 1 Samuel 8 through 31, which is practically the entire book of 1 Samuel. But we're going to kind of give a summary. Michael will have that, and there's actually a key element. I've got some outlines as well for this, but there's a key chapter that I want us to try to focus on a little bit to really understand what happens. I'm gonna hold off on that. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. So, Michael, take it away.
Alrighty. So as Bill mentioned, it is basically the entire book, 8 through, so you missed the first 8 chapters, but 31 is where it ends. And I spent the last 2 days thinking like, I can get through this. And I did get through it, but I was like, wow, there's so much here. And it's a really great story. So I would encourage you, even as we're going through this, take time in the next week leading up to when we speak next. Like, make sure you get in next week's as well. But read through it, because there is so much adventure that when people say like, oh, the Bible's boring, it's not for me, I'm like, read this book and you will be like, this is crazy. Like, these people went through so much. But I'm gonna, as I told Bill, I'm not doing it chapter by chapter. I'm just gonna kind of run through it, so you'll get the main things, and then he will jump in with what we're gonna focus on.
So, how exactly would you feel if I told you to go through chapter by chapter?
Oh, I'd have to redo it all. I just put line by line. I'm like, oh, this is good. And then it feels like I read it in the 2 days with the devotional over the course of the week. And it feels like I read it like a week ago. I'm like, I remembered this. And I'm like, I can't find it. I'm like, I don't know. But
10 chapters ago.
Yeah. All right. So getting started, Israel asks for a king. Saul is anointed by Samuel. Saul is made the king. Samuel gives a farewell speech, basically saying, God did not want this for you, but he has allowed it to happen. If you disobey God, you're basically going to be screwed. Which, very, thunder, the ground shakes and all the people are afraid, but they still want that king. Saul does a burnt offering without Samuel. He is rebuked because of this and told that his kingdom will not endure. Jonathan kind of takes the spotlight. He attacks Philistines. Then from there, the Lord rejects Saul as king, and he doesn't obey, basically, what Samuel has told him to kill everything. everything, but instead he keeps the best livestock. He lets the king of the foreign area live, and then the kingdom is basically going to be torn from Saul, just as he tore a part of Samuel's cloak. And then Samuel goes up and kills the king, which is like, I just imagine this really old prophet, and he's like, walks up to this boastful guy. He kills him. I'm like, whoa, unexpected, but yes, good. From there, David is anointed. David gets the Spirit of the Lord right as Saul is losing it and gets an evil spirit that torments him. David, though, plays the harp, and the evil spirit would leave Saul when he's playing. So around this time, David is now in the service of Saul and becomes his armor bearer. Then we jump to David and Goliath. David has a ton of successes just from here and throughout in battles, and that causes Saul to get jealous. Saul tries to kill David many times, but this was the first one. David and Jonathan have a really great and close friendship that's kind of shown throughout as we keep going. And then David is on the run because Saul is still trying to kill him. He pretends to be insane for the king of Gath, which that I was like, do we need to say that? I'm like, kind of, just because it's so random. He starts like foaming all over his beard, and the guy is basically like, we already have too many crazy people. Get rid of him.
Yeah, and and that's actually one piece when I go over that I wonder. It's like, I wonder what kind of conversation would have happened. I mean, it kind of gives you like a what kind of personality. I can't say that because I'm kind of thinking of a strong, bold man, and then I'm also kind of thinking as like a jokester kind of concept with that particular event. But I mean, the fact that it's like however he goes about it, I don't know what he would put in your mouth to make yourself foam, but. I mean, either way, I mean, however you look at it, David, I got to give props to you for coming up with that idea.
He's a good actor.
Yeah.
And then from there, David seeks help from different people, but from these priests, and that's where he gets the sword of Goliath to eat the consecrated bread. And then Saul ends up killing all those priests for helping him. So David, at this point, it talks about around 600 men. They're hiding in different caves. They're on the run. And then we get to David sparing Saul's life. So it says he went to relieve himself in a cave, and somehow he sneaks up unnoticed and cuts off a part of his robe, which that alone, I'm like, how does that happen? But basically then he confronts him saying, I could have taken your life, but I'm not going to. And I think it's really cool throughout that whole section because this happens later on, but he says he will not touch or destroy the Lord's anointed. So he's still like, even though he knows he's going to be king, is honoring the fact that at this moment, he's still the anointed king, and it basically says God can take him out in any way he chooses in the war, in the armies.
Right.
It's not in his hands. And then from there, we have the story of David, Nabal, and Abigail. Abigail saves basically their whole family and estate from being destroyed because the Nabal guy didn't want to share anything with him. Nabal is killed by the Lord, basically. And then David takes Abigail as his wife. She's very wise. David then spares Saul again, goes into his camp, takes his spear, which is in the ground near his head, in his water jug, calls across, saying, hey, basically, guess what? I saved your life again. You need a new bodyguard because I could have killed him. And then from there, David runs to Philistine territory. He's there a year and 4 months. He kills all these enemies, but he's telling them, oh, I'm killing parts of Israel. So they're all happy with him, like, wow, David's really turning on Israel. And that was just so funny to read. Like, you have to reread that a couple times in the notes to see, like, oh, he's telling him, and the reason he kills everyone is because he doesn't want it to come back to that Philistine king of like, no, he's killing probably their not friends, but like acquaintances that are definitely not Israel. And then from there, Philistine is about to go into battle against Israel. Saul is freaking out, sees that, he goes to the witch of Endor, brings back Samuel, and Samuel tells him, you are going to die in battle, you and your sons, and Israel is going to be handed over to them. David is sent back from fighting the Philistines because David is still with the Philistines and is going to be confronting Saul. And then they're like, nope, you know what? We don't trust you because you're not a true Philistine. Go back to town. Finds that their town is taken. They've been looted, stolen. So he chases after the Amalekites, which, interesting enough, that is who Saul was supposed to kill and destroy. And so it's cool how it comes back around of David then goes in and wipes out the people that had stolen their people. And then we end with, I know, Bill, you're happy we're there. Saul's sons are killed. So I think the saddest thing is Jonathan is killed in that, and just kind of seeing their friendship of like, man, we knew David was going to take over his kingdom, and Jonathan was okay with that, but he still gets lumped in with, being a part of Saul's lineage. And then Saul gets wounded by archers, and then he decides to fall on his sword. Then his armor bearer does the same, and they end with cutting off his head and putting his body on a wall.
Great.
So drastic. I'm just
I would say
the head and the body.
I would say they lived happily ever after to wrap that up, but it's not necessarily the case here.
It did say, though, they took people who Saul had saved, took his body down and burned him, which they said was not customary, but burned so that the Philistines would not keep trying to steal the body, and
right.
They buried the bones. So that was like kind of better, but also like, gosh, what a dark turn.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll probably be going over this. We'll find out in the future. But so yes, Saul falls down with his sword. I mean, basically murders himself or kills himself. But I want to say it's in 2 Samuel, in which an opposing individual says, "Hey, look, I've killed Saul," and then he's actually to discipline for. He's actually killed for killing Saul. So I mean, what I think is interesting about that is people see that as a contradiction. And I mean, if listeners, you can feel free to research where specifically it is that I'm referring to. It's been a while since I read that specific passage. But that's used as a contradiction, or people says like, well, yeah, one passage says that Saul killed himself, and the other passage says, well, this one killed him. It's like, well, if you think about it, it's pretty obvious. Is Saul killed himself? This other person tried to take credit for it. So it's not really a contradiction there, but so there is a lot to go over. Unfortunately, we don't have the luxury.
Just talk for like 5 minutes straight without stopping.
So we don't have the luxury to go over everything. But Michael made some great points here. I quite honestly, I think I was thinking about it. It's like, man, you put a lot of effort into making this massive outline of all we were going over with this week. But I like that you pointed out here in 1 Samuel chapter 8, because I want to, like I said, I want to jump to a particular chapter here. But we see this here in chapter 8, Samuel giving the warning against kings, of which you've mentioned earlier. You guys, this is basically, I'm giving the summarization here. This is what's going to happen. You're going to be under a dictator. You're going to have to pay a lot of taxes, about 40%. Oh, and there's capital gains tax that you've got to pay too, and there's inheritance tax that you've got to pay too, and there's land tax that you've got to pay too, and I'm just obviously modernizing this here, but he's given this basic warning, and then the Israelites are saying, no, it's all good, we'll do that, we just want to not worry about anything, we want somebody else to worry about it. So, and this is really the what happens from this point on is one of the consequences. I would say this would be, how do I want to word this? I would say this is an example of Romans 1, turning away from the one true God. And, the byproduct, as we see here, is this is the beginning of this. This is, okay, well, God's going to let this happen, and there's going to be consequences to it. And what's interesting about that, what I think here is, before we get into the particular chapter, is God allows these certain things in our lives to happen. We'll take this example of the Saul being king, which was bad news for the Israelites. And he says, okay, well, I have something better in mind, but I'm going to let you have your king, because you're going to learn a lesson from it as far as why I didn't want you to have a king. And then a couple years later, I'm going to bring the only king that matters, which is Jesus Christ. So,
in case you didn't know.
Yeah. He's
not even David.
Historically speaking, he doesn't exist at this point. We don't know who Jesus is. We know there's coming a Messiah, but we don't know it's Jesus. So, yeah, what I want to focus on is 1 Samuel chapter 15. And like I mentioned, I wish I would have pulled it out. I have a whole stack of Ligonier Ministries. I want to say it was one of their Table Talk magazines, which is devotional. And yes, this is unpaid ad. This is an unpaid advertisement. They have a wonderful ministry. I think it's like $20 per year, if I remember right, unless it's changed, or I could be wrong on that. And every month you'll get magazines, little Reader's Digest size things of devotionals. And I remember reading those. I haven't subscribed in a while. I unsubscribed because I was getting so many magazines and I wanted to keep them all. So I had to hold off. But in one of them in particular, they point out a means of worship or consequences of worship or lack of worship, false worship, however you'd like to word that. And it points to 1 Samuel chapter 15, which my heading here titles "The Lord Rejects Saul." And so what's happening here is that Samuel, it says, I'm just reading the text here from verse 1. Samuel said to Saul that the Lord sent me to anoint you king over the people of Israel. Now therefore listen to the words of the Lord. Thus says the Lord. Now that's the key piece that we need to have here is listen to the words of the Lord. Listen. Thus says the Lord of hosts, I have noted that the Amalek did not, what Amalek, so we're talking about a person, did to Israel, I'm getting my words confused here, in opposing them on the way, you know what, I don't have my glasses. Okay, sorry guys, you're going to have to deal with it. So where are we at? Verse 2, what Amalek did to Israel in opposing them on the way when they came out of Egypt. And we can actually find this. I'm actually looking down here in my commentary notes. You can find that in Exodus chapter 17, and there's also Numbers chapter 24 and Deuteronomy 25 and Judges chapter 6 as well to get a little bit more narrative of that. Now go and strike Amalek, which is, I believe he's the king here, and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, and child, infant, ox, and sheep, and animal. Now, Michael, putting you on the spot. This here is a means of worship. How?
I think, let's see. So it's obeying God and you're doing what he wants you to do. So I think that is like overall, that's like the main thing, even as humans, if we don't understand or he didn't understand, but
right.
He's kind of saying he's punishing the Amalekites for what they have done to them. So he's using, say, Saul to bring about this judgment.
Yeah.
So by obeying him, I guess you would say you're trusting, you're following him, and you can, I guess, turn that into worshiping him because you're doing what he wants for you in your life. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, and I
don't think I drew that together.
I would agree with that. I mean, you went off a little more with that, but I agree with you. What's happening here, and people would see this and they think, like, well, why would God do something like this? Why would he kill the women? Why would he kill the children, the infants, and all of this? I mean, that's very, it's not a very loving God to do that. What's happening here is, I mean, this is also a pagan nation, which we've talked about what God does to pagan nations who fail to repent. But one thing we need to know is the Amalekites were a nomadic people in the desert descended from Esau, Genesis chapter 36. And when they became marked, I'm reading a commentary, by the way, I'm not this fluent with my words, they became a marked people when they attacked Israel in the wilderness after leaving Egypt. And those are the verses I mentioned previously. So this was a couple hundred years later, I think. I don't know the dating particularly. I think it was, 2000 or something? I want to actually get that. I'm flipping back in the beginning of my Bible to see what dates we have. Do you got a date handy?
Nope.
Mr. Nope. Sweet. I'm just... Okay, yeah, the events of 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel took place between 1100 BC and 971. So it's been about 1,000 years approximately since the Amalekites decided to attack the Israelites in the wilderness on their leaving Egypt. So, I mean, I want to say, no, I would say vengeance is mine, says the Lord. And I would say that God is slow to anger and he is patient. But a time happens when a society gets so deep in sin that, okay, judgment is coming. And every nation has or will experience something like this. But what's important to note about this is why are we not sparing anything? Why are we killing all the men, all the women, all the children, all the infants and oxen, everything? I'm curious about the animals, to be honest. But I have some thoughts on this. But Michael, I'm curious. Can you give me an answer as far as why God is saying kill man, woman, child, and infant?
I think as we look back through a lot of the Bible, even now, like we're still towards the beginning, but as other cultures infiltrate Israel, it really starts to degrade everything. So when it's looking at marrying the women, you should not marry foreign women. You should not bring in their idols and even the animals, I think, are a symbolism of what their, say, evil land produced. And so I think that idea of they are God's chosen people, and these other things, animals, people are not, and you don't want to kind of corrupt or invade your own society with it, where maybe even as a child, an infant, what do you mean? But it's just that idea of totality of like God saying we're judging them, and it's everything. Because I think that is later on, even when people are not saved, they're thinking, but I did some good things, my goods outweighed the bad, and that's not how God works.
Right.
If you're not saved, or you're not chosen within that, then you're doomed to hell, like to death, eternal death. And so I think this is kind of setting that standard as well, to see like these are God's chosen people, and if you're not, then you're not, and maybe you'll get judged soon, or maybe it'll be a couple hundred years, but God does not forget.
Yeah, and I would like what I call these judgments. There's two types of judgments, at least how I categorize it. There's the final judgment, or you could say macro judgment, which we have in Revelation. But everything else I see as what I call a micro judgment. And this is what's taking place here. Is like, why would God do this? It's like, well, he did this a couple thousand years ago with a flood. He cleansed the earth, so to speak. And that's what's happening here, is the influence from these. I personally don't understand the infant part, but I'm not going to argue that. Leave no remnant. I want my people to be holy. I want them to know who I am in all aspects of my character, and I don't want them to be. I think you mentioned this, to be polluted with false gods. So, not only this is a way of God, obviously bringing judgment against the unrepentant, and they've had 1,000 years to repent. Clearly, didn't happen. So it's come, but then also it's a means to show God's love to his children. It says, I love you so much that I'm going to protect you from them. And that's why we see these judgments taking place. And there's a couple other examples you can give. But, this is a sense of worship, is to honor God, listen to what he asks. But Saul doesn't do this. And I want to share this piece here, and then I go into an article that I mentioned here that I came across. Michael, I shared that with you, is Saul goes in, and he goes ahead and cleans house, but he doesn't clean the entire house. What do we have here? We'll start in verse 8. And he took Agag, the king of the Amalekites, alive, and devoted to destruction all the people with the edge of the sword. But Saul and the people spared Agag, and the best of the sheep, and of the oxen, and the fattened calves, and the lambs, and all that was good. And I could be wrong here, but I would say that the all that was good would refer to, the spoils of war, not just this livestock, but also their jewelries and decorations and so on. So I could be wrong on that. But regardless, Saul disobeyed the Lord. He not only had a sense of disobedience to God's commands, but also a wrong means of worship. And I don't have it underlined, but later on he tries to worship by offering these as a sacrifice to the Lord. Michael, if you want to find that while I keep rambling.
Which part? When he tries to justify?
Well, trying to make an offering, I believe, is where we have. So,
later on when he makes it when he shouldn't have?
Yeah, I don't think... Okay, I might have my thoughts mixed up here. I don't think it's here in this chapter. Anyways, bottom line is we see a sense of worship, and we see a sense of wrong worship taking place. God has one way of doing things, and Saul says, wait, I know a better way. And what's happening here is that he thinks he has this better way, but it's a wrong means of worship. I'm repeating myself right now. Let me go ahead and open this article because I stumbled across this the other day. I was just doing a little bit of digging. This is from David Jeremiah. Is there a wrong way to worship God? We often get in this mindset of this. It doesn't matter how we worship, but as long as we're sincere, as long as it's from the heart. Now, there's some problems with that. Is that number one, God knows our hearts better than we know our hearts, and I think He even knows the outcomes better than we know the outcomes. We might see it's like, okay, I'm going to do this particular thing. God has this particular way of doing things. Let's say, for an example, church. Your stereotypical worship service at church, and we start off. Yeah, I can't even do that. I'd have to go dig more into church history. I was trying to give it like a narrative of the basic church worship that we're going to start with. I'll make something up. You start with this building, whatever that might look like. Let your imagination wander. I'm going to call it just stone or sandstone. And we just have a bunch of people singing the Psalms. Beautiful echo, beautiful fellowship. The acoustics are wonderful. I mean, you think you were in a concert hall. And then years later, let's go ahead and add, for the record, well, we'll talk more about that later. Let's go ahead and add guitars. Let's go ahead and add smoke screens or smoke machine. That's what it is, not smoke screen. Let's go ahead and add those neon flashing lights, and let's go ahead and turn the speakers up. And we get to this point, which we're at today in society, that we think that this is a means. It's like, I'm worshiping the Lord, but He's got a certain way of doing things. Now, I'm not saying you've got to go worship in a stone temple and, just sing the Psalms. I think that's awesome. I think that's wonderful. But we get influenced by the world itself so much that we really lose sight of what it means to worship God. Worship itself is the act of really doing anything as a means of honoring God, obeying God, and giving glory to Him. And much of our worship today really becomes self-centered. It's like, wow, that really hit me. I mean, I feel really energized. I feel really motivated, or I feel really whatever other sort of comment you want to throw in there from this. And it's become self-focused rather than God-focused. And that's really what we see here with Samuel. I did
find it in chapter 13.
Chapter 13, okay.
The context is Samuel is supposed to come to make a burnt offering to have God's favor on this battle they're going to. He says, I'll be there in 7 days. 7 days comes, Saul does not see him, so he's like, oh, we haven't heard. The men are starting to get scared and scatter. I'll do it. And you can imagine it, right as he finishes it, Samuel comes up and says, what have you done? You have not obeyed what God has commanded.
Yeah, and so I've got my chapters mixed up here, but ultimately, false worship leads to rejection. I think that's really what we want to pull from this. But this article that I have here from David Jeremiah, and I'm not going to read the whole sense here, maybe the first paragraph of each section. We'll have the link for this article in the description of this episode here, so you guys can check it out as well. Number one here is what's his title? Is there a wrong way to worship God? He marks off here that in the first point, God does not accept ignorant worship. In Acts 17, we find that the Apostle Paul, presenting Christians, this is according to David Jeremiah, presenting Christianity to a secular audience in Athens, Greece, a city renowned for rich art, literature, philosophy, and politics. I would love to be there. I'd love to see that. I mean, we've got pictures, paintings, artifacts, and we can get a glimpse at it, but I mean, to actually see the beauty of the artwork, I mean, it'd be amazing, and its freshness. Besides the point, back to Jeremiah. When Corinth was the leading commercial hub in Greece, Athens was the Western world's foremost culture and intellectual center. And it was widely religious, home to just 10,000 people. Athens boasted as many as 30,000 religious statues. This proliferation of idols spurred Paul to give an impassionate speech distinguishing the merits of Christianity. So, and you can read more about that in Acts chapter 17. referring to an unknown God, but these people were worshiping. These people had a heart in it. They were, however it is they were particularly worshiping, they were worshiping their gods, and they had an unknown God. And what's interesting about that is how that was set up at that time was I can't remember exactly the process, but basically there's a system to identify gods, create a god for this. And they had a statue dedicated to an unknown God that they worshipped. And the point was, in case we've forgotten one, we want to recognize him here. So they have a sense of worship, but as we see here, there's a sense of ignorant worship. And Paul brings this to place, and he says, no, your gods are meaningless. The one true God, he's the unknown God that you are. He actually turns it around on them that they're not worshiping. And he says, to come and worship this unknown God. I'll tell you who this God is that you do not know. So we have a sense of ignorant worship here. And again, you can read more of the article. But we have here a second one. And I think this is interesting. And again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. God does not accept an improper worship. And actually, as I skim this, I'm curious if it cites Samuel at all. 1 Samuel. It does not. But we have this sense here in chapter 13 of a sense of false worship. Keep in mind, this is not cited here, but David Jeremiah says this: it is not difficult to find examples of improper worship in the Bible. Genesis 4, Cain attempted to worship God in his own way by giving an offering of the fruit of the ground of the Lord instead of a blood sacrifice. The writers of Hebrew explains, according to the law, almost all things were purified with blood, and without shedding of blood there was no remission. Hebrews 9:22. Cain's actions reflected a heart that was not devoted to God. So he gave basically a half worship instead of this blood sacrifice, such as his brother did. He says, well, we'll go ahead and try something else, and then is ultimately rejected from that. So this last sentence here, even the Lord spoke to Cain and invited him to make the right choices, Genesis 4, 6, and 7. And he rejected God's authority and became angry. So we have this sense of, God himself, he's got this means of worship. He has this way in which he wants us to worship. And it's not a means of a legalistic system, but a means of keeping us in his grace. And the worship, how God wants us to worship, is a means of, I just looked at the time, it's a way, we're not going to be able to get through all of these, but it is a way in which God steers us and points us to Jesus Christ. I think of one that always pops into my head, Exodus. And I think we see it in the Leviticus as well. I could be wrong on that. But Exodus, towards the end of Exodus, we see this description of what these priests are supposed to wear. Very beautiful robes, very well, by comparison to what the culture would wear at that time, their general clothes. These priests were to basically stand out. They were to appear as if to be some of the most beautiful people. And it wasn't to say that they were, but it was a means to illustrate this setting apart, this being separated from the world and God. So, I think God puts that place. We have this formula of how God wanted the Levitical priests to dress. And the purpose was to say, I want you to be unique. I want you to be set apart. And that's where we see all of these do's and don'ts that God has in place here. And this means of worship, the formula of worship, is just that. It's, I want you to be set apart. I want you to know who I am. And through your worship, you will know who I am. And you will be in awe of who I am. You will praise me and you will love me and so on. And not only that, but all of it's going to point to Jesus Christ. And which actually bring this up too. I want to say John chapter 4 is conversation with a Samaritan woman. Says, where do we worship? You guys worship over here, we worship over there. And then Jesus says, it doesn't really matter, because, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, it doesn't matter that what God wants, what he's looking for, what will happen is that he wants us to worship in spirit and in truth. And I think that's actually a key point. I'll stop my rambling here in a minute, but I think that's really something I want us to take away from this. we often cite this, or at least I've heard it many times. There are some individuals or some pastors, churches in general that I says like, well, I don't necessarily think that what you're doing or what this other church is doing or so on is worship, and here's why. And then they try to cite that. And I think we really miss this is, yes, spirit and truth. And now in that context of John chapter 4, I don't think it's necessarily referring to the Holy Spirit, however he is with us. But rather in our spirit, in our character, with basically everything that we have. And then we have truth. I think that's really one that we miss when we talk about worship. There's true worship. There's worshiping the truth and worshiping in truth. I think both of those are something that should be synonymous or harmonious. Harmony? Harmony. We'll just do that. Be safe. In harmony with each other. Because what this does is we worship the true God. We worship, read, do everything related to his word. But then we also look to the truth, which is Jesus Christ. He is the truth, the way, the truth, and the life, and none come before him. None come to him except through the Father. So, I am done rambling. I don't know when I started this. I'm just staring at this. I'm reading. I'm looking at the text. I'm looking at this article, and I realize it's 43 minutes in. When did when did you stop? I think we should start with there.
I don't know. It's all good things, though.
Right.
But I will say, chapter 15, the thing that happened there was he was trying to justify disobeying God, saying we got and kept all of these livestock to offer them to God, to sacrifice. And he kept trying to, which I think it's just, when you've done something bad. And Samuel was not a god to them, but really, as you read the context of even when Samuel says, God has rejected you, he's like, but please eat with me, come and dine with me, don't leave me, because he knew, and the people at that time knew, if God's prophet is not with you, God is against you. And
right.
So all of this, once Samuel comes, it's like tucking your tail and like, oh no, but we're going to give this to God. And that's the whole point, is like, in that time, God did not tell them to do that. He did not say, save these fattened and beautiful animals to give to me. He said, wipe them out. And so I think that as you're talking about, like, God has very specific ways, and in the Old Testament, it was even more so. So I think we are very well off now that Jesus has come and created a much easier way. But then even still, as you're talking in that article, it mentions so many ways that we can bring idols into it, where we're singing, like if we're talking about worship music, we're singing about ourselves, like, look how good we are. And that is something that is not what should be in worship. It's we're worshiping God. How great is our God? Not God is so great to me. You're like, maybe that has a different like area where you can sing about that, but not when we're in church. And I always think too, in the New Testament, like Jesus says, like, they'll come to me, we did these things in your name, and he's like, depart from me, I never knew you. And so I can see that in whether it's the churches that are doing false teachings, but these people that are coming in thinking we're worshiping God, we're doing all of these great things, but do you actually know the author of the Bible? Do you know God? Do you know Jesus? And that's kind of what that article and kind of what the whole devotional is talking about, of like, we look at the outside appearance, but God looks on the inside. And so
I got something.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I thought I said something wrong. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure. Like, I wrote it 1 Samuel 16:7. Don't judge the outward appearance. Okay.
Yeah. Well, because I shared this the other day on our page, on our ministry page. Well, first off, continue. You know, it's too late now. I'm going to interrupt you.
At least I'm not in trouble.
Yeah. Well, and
keep scaring me.
I'll be completely honest with you. I've been guilty of using this, and in this manner. But what's weird about it is, as I was reading this, which I'll read it here in a second. As I was reading this text, I was in the mindset of, yes, I know that. So pretty much I knew what the point of these words are, but I was misusing them. I am really thankful for this. I'm really thankful that this came across, because that was a correction for me. Anyways, continuing on with this. Man, look, this picture I shared on our Facebook page. It says, "Man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart." That's a quote. I mean, we all like to use this. We've all heard this at some point in our lives. We've all used this at some point in our lives. But what's interesting about this is the part that I was like, well, I feel pretty stupid for knowing this and not applying it. Many quote this verse, 1 Samuel 16:7, as if they mean God loves me for who I am. And yet they miss the fact that God said this while, capital letters, rejecting someone, which was Eliab, for what was in his heart, not because God saw Eliab's best himself. So I think the phrase itself can be interchangeable. You can use it for a positive, but also a negative. But at the same time, primarily, man uses this as a positive. Michael, for an example, you're saying something about me. I'm going to defend myself. Well, you're just looking at the outward appearance. God knows what my heart is, and
just wait till Jeremiah. Right, the heart is like the most evil, wicked.
The heart is deceitful above all things. Who can know it?
Despicable. You're like, just wait a little bit till we get to the prophets, and
I hope we get to that, because I got some comments on that too.
Are not good, and like even in when Jesus is talking about what you can and can't eat, he's like, don't worry about what's coming in. Worry about what's in your heart and what's coming out, because that is like where the most evil things can come out from.
Right. Yeah. So I think I would say. I guess in means to worship, I'd wrap that up with this and I think all people should ask this question to yourselves, or should reflect and meditate on it. I'm a guy that I completely abhor turning the lights off, turn the stage lights on, smokes and all that stuff. The whole concert themed worship, I can't stand it. I can't take any of it serious. I'll just, sit there quietly, and I'll be honest, there's been times where I've just been scrolling on my phone or reading the Bible on my phone, or, just something other than this, because I was like, that's not even worship. I can't take it any seriously. But so that's how much I abhor it. My personal opinion is just straight congregation, open up your hymns. We're going to sing. And it's beautiful. I admit it is 100% beautiful. The church that I'm at, they do this, and there's some songs where we all know the song itself, and I just find myself not in worship, not in the singing of this, because it's so beautiful. But anyways, the point of this is, whether you're on the concert venue side or not, both myself, my side of views, and your side of views, if you have them, if you're opposed, we need to look at this, and we need to say, okay, we need to look at the negative, because I think the negative is the best way in which we can grow from this. Is, okay, man looks on the outward appearance, but God knows the heart. And ask yourself, how is my heart? Is my heart worshiping spirit and truth? Is my heart in sincere devotion to God and His commands? And no, we don't. We need to go kill little children and infant and women and ox and all that. But how true is your worship, I would say? Are you worshiping in spirit and in truth? Or is your worship more self-focused? Oh, I love this song. Wow, this really spoke to me. Whatever other sort of me statement or me mentality you can get. Because when we go to worship, it's to worship God, not ourselves. So, do you have any thoughts, Michael, before we close?
Yeah, I can wrap it up with some of the key points from the devotional that I thought was really good. So it kind of started out letting us know, which we all know, following God isn't easy, but the Israelites wanted an easy way. They wanted a king they could see, and God was their king. 400 years. They have all of this history showing that He is the king, and in God's economy, character is more important than your appearance, your giftedness, and all of that. But Israel wanted that security and stability. They didn't want to be different. They wanted a king they could see. And so God lets us make decisions. He doesn't manipulate us. He gives us free will and a choice. But with that comes the decisions we make are going to have consequences. And I think the encouraging thing with that is that it doesn't dissolve our relationship with Him. And He's always waiting for us to come back. But at the same time, if you've made choices, they
Right.
will have consequences, which we see all throughout, even with David, like the choices he made of taking Bathsheba. And like, man, there were some awful, like his whole family line gets screwed up because he didn't follow some key things that God set in place back in, I think, Deuteronomy of like, don't have multiple wives, don't, collect
Right.
all of these like armies and horses and all that. Like we see even with David, but he was there and waiting for David to come back. And we see those Psalms where he does like pours his hearts out. And at the end of it all, though, God wants obedience, and nothing can put us beyond the reach of God's grace. So I think that's like a really good thing to remember of like, man, these chapters are hard when it comes to, the topic of worship. Like that's not an easy thing. Like you
Right.
can have so many weeks of diving into all of this, but knowing that, it is between you and God, and just taking that seriously and knowing that he is our king. We don't need
Yeah.
to see this false sense of security.
Yeah. There's actually, I'll close up with this here. There's a book, staring at my bookshelf, there's a book I have called Worship by MacArthur. And yes, I'm a fanboy, I'll admit. But to benefit of the doubt, I also have Spurgeon, I also have Lutzer, I also have Sproul, I also have Lawson, I also have Ken Ham. So it's not strictly MacArthur fanboy. But however, he's one of the first that I've come across. Anyways, besides the point, he's got a point. Of course, he's got a point. He has a book called Worship, and I'll put the link in the description of this. You guys can check it out. Wonderful book where he talks more in depth about worship, what it means to have true worship, what worship does, or how we should worship, how we don't, and so on. But I would actually encourage you to check that out. He dissects it, points to scriptures. Very, very well written. So, and I would encourage you to use this book as a reflection of, is my worship, am I worshiping God or am I worshiping self? Is my worship pleasing to God or displeasing? So yeah, and these other points, we can wrap up with this. I'm just going to give the titles here. God does not accept an idolatrous worship. Again, I'll have the article link in the description of this video podcast. And God does not accept inferior worship. So that's all the titles we have there. That's all the time we have. So I would encourage you guys. We're actually, Michael, where are we going at next week? We got 1 Samuel chapter 16, I want to say, if I'm remembering this right. I'm flipping pages right now.
We're going to talk more about David.
So we've got First Samuel, which is interesting. First Samuel, if I can even speak tonight. 1 Samuel chapter 16 and 1 Kings chapter, or completely, no, actually we go to that later. 1 Kings chapter 2. So if you're following along with these episodes and you want to, just share your thoughts, whatever that might be. 1 Samuel 6. I'm getting these all mixed up now. The book we're in now, chapter 16, 1 Samuel 16, and 1 Kings chapter 2.
And it's not through. When I first read it, I'm like, do not tell me you want me to read the whole 2 Samuel leading up to 1 Kings.
Is that what you thought it was originally?
When I first looked, yeah. Because we just read so much content. But then I was like, oh, good, we skipped to...
The first part of this devotional book was just kind of a warm-up, and now we're going to go in deeper. So...
I think the authors are like, we just got to put it all in. Like, right. Oh, there's too much. And as they say in the intro, they're like, there's too much. We cannot talk about everything. But then as they're going, they're like, but this is a good chunk. Let's throw it all in.
All right. So that's all we have. Michael?
Thank you for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider supporting this ministry. You can do so in a number of ways. You can comment and rate the show. Your interaction will help us improve the show and also help others find us. You can share the show and ministry with your friends in order to help strengthen their walk of faith. And finally, you can support us financially by becoming a supporting member. Members will have early access to content created, as well as discounted or free material as a special thanks through our Patreon platform. And that's not all. As a supporting member, you have the chance of being invited onto the show as a special guest to share your own story. I'm Michael White, and this is Christian Cornerstone 412 Ministry Podcast.